Hey, what's up, guys? It's Max here, and welcome to the breakdown of the 2017 exam. Now, I've said it 1,000 times, and I'll say it again. If you want to get high 40s, all you need to do is figure out exactly what the high achievers do. It's a dramatically simple lesson, but I've seen it occur time and time again where the greatest challenge that students face is just not understanding what exactly needs to be done. And I've seen students figure out what needs to be done and their scores jump several grades. It happened to me and it will no doubt happen to you. So, to that end, I've just written a quick essay on the 2017 exam and we're going to break down exactly what I did and hopefully you guys can glean something from this. A lot of the stuff I will talk about in this video, we've probably talked about in class, but I've tried to spin this essay a little bit different to give you guys something new. So this isn't just going to be a rehash of what we do in tutoring. I've done something a little bit different here. I've gone out on a limb. It's a little bit advanced, but I'm hoping you guys can follow along. So let's get started. Read the Spire article if you haven't already, and read the second article, and just take a few moments to pick a few little paths you might go down with analyzing these articles. What are a few quotes you might draw upon when writing your own analysis? And then come back and get started with the video. So I'll give you a few moments to do that. All right, so you've done that. You're back here. Let's get started. Introduction. Now, you guys all know there's two things you need to do in your introduction. The first is, here's the essay I've written. The first is contextual statement. The second is the contention. Very simple. The introduction shouldn't take long. Now, finding the precise contention might take a little bit of time, but the actual writing of the introduction shouldn't take long. And I'm going to do exactly what I teach you guys always to do with your contextual statement, which is just identify the topic of concern. Now, you will get two articles in your final exam, most definitely. And there's going to be a topic of concern. One person in the article, like Principal Walker, is going to say one thing, and the other person in the article is probably going to disagree with them. Generally, that's what happens. Sometimes, like in the 2015 exam, the disagreement might not be really obvious. It might be a qualification of a point, but there still will be a disagreement. Essentially, it's going to be one person saying, we should do this, and the other person saying, we shouldn't do this, which is exactly what happens in this article. We have Principal Walker basically saying, hey guys, we need to we need to reduce the amount of rubbish we are using. She says it that's her main point throughout the thing. She says it very clearly at the end. We must confront our rubbish use for the sake of future generations. And her main point throughout the piece is, hey guys, we need to stop using so much rubbish. Pretty simple. But just remember that if you're ever feeling a little bit lost with the contention, at the end of the day, it's just going to be a very simple idea. It's going to be either let's do this, let's not do this. We have this problem, e.g., there's too much rubbish. We need to stop using so much rubbish. The contention is always very simple. It's not complicated. And one of the big problems I see with a lot of students, and I know some of you guys here have struggled with that, is just overcomplicating the contention. All right, and what does Louise say? Louise basically just says, no, we don't need to reduce our rubbish. That's her contention. That's it. So that's the topic of concern. The topic of concern is whether or not the Spire primary school community, the parents, need to reduce the amount of rubbish they're using. All right, so say that. The topic of concern in the school newsletter and response between Principal Walker and parent Louise is whether members of the school community, particularly parents, it is about parents, need to reduce the amount of waste they and their children produce. Simple. And what this lets you do when you identify the topic of concern is it lets you flow on to each person's contention very easily and fluidly. Now, all you've got to do, you've outlined the topic of concern, all you've got to do is say which side of the debate does each writer fall upon. So, Walker, what side of the debate does she fall upon? Well, Walker proposes, let me get rid of this. Walker proposes that such a reduction is necessary to preserve the environment for future generations. That's her contention. She thinks it's necessary. Now, look, I didn't need to add on this bit here. This isn't actually strictly necessary. That's not her. I mean, actually, maybe I'll take it out. It's not really her main contention. This is a reason why she thinks this reduction is necessary. But I've just added it on. Yeah, for the hell of it. I mean, look, the contention is just the main point, but sometimes you can substantiate it just a little bit. You might offer like one big reason why, and this is a pretty big reason why. But generally, just stick to something more like this. Walker proposes that such a reduction is necessary. Yeah. Now, what does Dennis say? Dennis rejects Walker's proposal, arguing it is unfair and unfeasible for parents like herself to adopt. So, notice a few things here. Walker proposes. She proposes something. She advances her argument. Dennis doesn't just advance a completely separate argument. Dennis rejects Walker's proposal. So that's the relationship between the two. You have to identify the relationship between the two writers. Is one writer outright rejecting the other writer's argument? Or is it a little bit more complicated, like in 2015, have a look, where the writer doesn't necessarily reject the first writer's argument, but qualifies it, offers a kind of different spin on it. So Dennis rejects Walker's proposal, and what's Dennis's main argument? That it's kind of unfair and unfeasible. Basically, she's saying, look, it's unfair what you're asking of us. We're already doing all this stuff. That's kind of a big point. She's kind of got two big points, that it's unfair and also that it's just not practical. It's not going to work. Have you any idea how many plastic bottles, blah, blah, blah. This all takes time. We have to go to work. That basically what Walker is saying, Dennis believes, just does not make sense. So not Dennis, Louise. I keep calling her Dennis. What Walker is saying, according to Louise, just does not make sense. So that's the main argument for both of them. I might just put back this here because it is kind of the central point. But why I kind of took it out there for a second was I need to make clear that at the end of the day, the contention is just very simple. It's a one-point statement, and do not overcomplicate it. All the analysis will occur later on. Now, notice I haven't included a contention of the image. I used to do that. I was taught to do it at high school. But as I've said to a lot of you guys, I've noticed a trend lately where examiners don't really care if you do it or don't. And a lot of teachers seem to be saying it's not a big thing anymore. It used to be a thing when I was at high school, but now not so much. And I don't think it actually makes sense to write a contention of the image, mainly because the image just is a component of the article. It's not a whole separate thing. The image is a persuasive tool. It's just like the use of a rhetorical question or the use of a particularly evocative adjective. You wouldn't write a contention for an adjective or a rhetorical or something like that. This is a component. So I leave the analysis of the image now purely to the body paragraphs, although I did used to include it in my introduction. All right, so let's get started on the body paragraphs. Now, this is where I've done something a little bit different. So bear with me here. This is a little bit more high level. And the reason it's high level is it's going beyond what most students do. Now, as you all know, there are two components to language analysis. That is, finding out what the writing suggests and what the effect is on the audience. If that's not clear, go back to the lesson pages but it should be by now. So what I've done here is I've tried to figure out, I've analyzed the article according to purposes, what the writer intends to do on a large scale with her argument. So let's look at what I mean by this. The purpose of the opening paragraph is to establish that Spire holds a strong commitment to preserving the environment. Okay, so what this requires, okay, firstly, what's the benefit of analysing an article according to its purpose? Well, firstly, it makes you stand out. Most students don't look at it, say, like a whole body paragraph, like the opening paragraph, and go, well, what's the purpose of this paragraph? What function does this paragraph play within the rest of the piece? How is this paragraph used to persuade? But increasingly, examiners and teachers are wanting students to actually do something more like this, to not just do the nitty gritty, what does this particular word suggest, but to actually analyze the piece according to a broader argument. So that's what I've done here. I've analyzed why did the writer, what was the writer trying to achieve in this opening paragraph? And my interpretation is, and remember, it's English. It's not 1 + 1 = 2. It's can you give evidence for your viewpoint? And that's why English is so liberating and fantastic. The purpose of the opening paragraph is to establish that Spire holds a strong commitment to the environment. Okay, so this is what I'm saying is the purpose. Now read this paragraph, see if that kind of makes sense. Maybe you disagree, maybe you think there's another purpose, and no doubt there can be competing and multiple purposes. But the idea is that she mentions all this, she's basically boasting in the first paragraph. She mentions all this stuff they've done. We have 4 different bins for our waste products, we're the only local school, blah, 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 our vegetable garden is organic, blah, blah, blah. And the point I'm making here is that she's doing this in order to show how environmentally friendly the school is. All right, so she gives, I substantiate my point by Walker provides a litany of examples to evidence this commitment. Not only is Spire the only local school that holds a walk to school day, It has a truly organic vegetable garden and pet hens that scratch and roam. Now, some of you guys might be scratching your heads going, what the hell, Max? You always say, just keep one quote to one sentence so you can analyze things deeply. But I'm actually going to, I have broke my rule a little bit here, but I actually am going to analyze each of these quotations in the next few sentences. So the first quotation, not only is Spire the only local school, the first quotation suggests that Spire's commitment to the environment is unique, the only. The second quotation evaluates Spire's commitment numerically, suggesting it ranks relatively high, considering it has not 3 but 4 different ways of disposing of rubbish. So this is all the suggestion stage. At the moment, all I'm doing, I'm not looking at the effect on the audience. All I'm doing is analyzing what each of these basically boasts that Walker makes suggests. What do they suggest? The third quotation implies authenticity, a truly organic vegetable garden, signaling that Spire takes pride in honestly maintaining a genuine vegetable garden. And the fourth quotation is a visceral depiction of the school's chickens, which evokes an open farm-like image of the schoolyard wherein animals are valued and free to roam. Scratch and roam, pet hens wandering around the yard. It's organic, they're free to do what they like. It's quite picturesque and almost beautiful. Okay, now I get into the broader sort of connecting it back to this bit, the purpose. Thus, these 4 quotations each testify in their own way to the commitment Spire holds in preserving the environment. Okay. So that's just connecting it back to the purpose, which is basically that these four quotations each show how environmentally friendly Spire is. All right, now we get to the effect. What's the effect on the reader? This may inspire and embolden readers to join Spires in their commitment by curtailing the amount of rubbish they produce. For others, it may remind them of the hard work of an important institution of their local community, the primary school, to uphold environmental concerns. And for community-minded individuals who care about belonging and contributing to their community, such a reminder may motivate them to join Spires in a similar environmental commitment. Okay, I'm just going to get rid of this sentence here, actually. I don't need it. It's completely redundant. All right, so preserving the environment. This to the commitment Spires holds in preserving this may. Okay, notice what I've done here. I've said it many times in class, is that I've specifically identified the people that this kind of boasting or establishing of the school's environmentally friendly commitment might appeal to. What sort of people would be inspired or impressed by a school that says how environmentally friendly they are? No doubt people who value environmentally friendly kind of activities. But also, and I could have written that, you could very well go, and this establishing the commitment of Spire's environmentally friendly activities may appeal to those with a similar set of values. I decided to do something a little bit different, which is to focus on community-minded individuals. So for community-minded individuals who care about belonging and contributing to their community, who don't want to see rubbish everywhere, who want to see their community protected, such a reminder of what their local school does may motivate them to join Spires in a similar environmental commitment. So just to be clear on what I'm actually saying here, it's sort of the idea, it's like if you're a community-minded person and you see your local school or the local church doing some sort of activity, you kind of want to join in because they're part of your community. You automatically sort of think it's a good idea. And that's the sort of idea here. This is kind of a bit more high level sort of persuasion analysis. But if you can kind of follow along with this a little bit, or just let it breed in your mind what I might be getting at here, then that will be helpful for you guys. Okay, so that was a little bit different to what I usually do. Actually, it was very different. I don't think I've ever analyzed something in this way where I've done four different quotes and then broken each quote down. It's a little bit different to what I usually do, but hey, it's good to try and experiment with different things. But the overarching point of this paragraph is I've gone, here's a purpose of what Walker's trying to do in the first paragraph. Here is how Walker demonstrates her purpose. Sorry, here. Here are the examples. Here are what these examples of the purpose suggest. Here is what the suggestion of these examples how they may affect the audience. Okay. All right, next paragraph. But why does Walker start her email by establishing this commitment? This is high level again. Now I'm going, okay, why the heck did she even start by trying to show how environmentally friendly Spire is? One possible reason is that Walker intends to defend against the potential objection from readers that they already do enough to help the environment. Okay. It's really important to keep a notebook of different persuasive techniques and things you see in articles, because after a while you'll see something like this opening paragraph, and you'll realize, hey, I have seen this a million times before. Really, I have. It's completely different set of writing. But the basic persuasive structure of it, if you've read a lot of persuasive articles, which you guys will in year 12 and year 11, you will see what the writer is doing here. And the writer, what she's doing is defending against a potential objection. Writers do this all the time. They'll start off like an article and they'll go, oh yeah, I know we're doing all this stuff, and yeah, I know we're making all this effort and blah blah blah, but we actually need to do more. And what that shows to the readers who might be going, okay, what the hell? Don't we already do all this environmentally friendly stuff? Like why do we need to do more? Isn't Spire a really environmentally friendly school? What this shows to the reader is that Walker is aware of this. She's aware that they do a lot. She's considered that fact, and she's concluded that actually no, we need to do more. That it's not good enough in and of itself. So it just shows the persuasive effect on the reader is that it suggests to the reader that Walker has actually considered perhaps alternate viewpoints to her own, possible weaknesses of a viewpoint, the fact that they've already done a lot to help the environment. And therefore it makes her a more credible writer. That she's not just going, blah, 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 we need to do more, we never do anything. And in fact, she actually spins this in a quite interesting way. So look at this. By suggesting that Spies is a school that is committed to helping the environment, Walker therefore has a reason to appeal to when demanding that more must be done to reduce the packaging. Without such a commitment, the audience may have been left wondering, why Spies needs to be concerned with reducing rubbish. So, why start her email by establishing this commitment that they're environmentally friendly? Well, if the school is committed to being environmentally friendly, then it would be very strange and out of character of the school and contradictory of the school if they just let potential environmentally an act of terror on the environment, increased rubbish, to just go by. It would be out of character if they just said we shouldn't be worrying about superfluous packaging in our everyday lives. Because the school is committed to helping the environment and blah, blah, blah. So the point is here that if she hadn't established that the Spire community has this commitment, and then she just suddenly said, hey, we need to reduce our rubbish, the readers might just be like, okay, well, why? Why do we need to do that? We're just a school. Why do we need to do that? And this happens this sort of persuasive technique happens all the time in your daily life. We expect charities, to go and help the poor. If something happens, people run out of water because of a drought, we expect local charities to stand up and do something. Why? Because they've made a commitment to help people. We don't expect Coca-Cola to go down and start handing out bottles of water. That would be great if they did, but we wouldn't get angry at them if they didn't, really, because that's not what they're about. That's not their commitment. That's not contradicting their own values. But possibly if a charity who said, hey, we're committed to helping our local community, and then there was a massive drought, and then the charity just did absolutely nothing, we would be going, okay, well, what the hell? You're supposed to be trying to help people. Okay, so she situates her argument within this commitment, and that gives a reason to her readers to actually understand why they need to be concerned. Why? Because Spies is committed to reducing rubbish. So it's about showing the values of the school. Further, by signalling the values of the school, Walker gives the audience context to justify why action is necessary, not merely because it helps the environment, but because helping the environment is part of Spies' identity. It is what Spies, as implied by Walker, takes pride in doing. So this is kind of similar to the point I was just making, which is that She establishes this commitment and she suggests that this is what Spires is about. Spires is about helping the environment. That's what we do. We're the only local school that has a walk to pedal school day once a week. It's our identity, it's our character, it's who we are. And what this means is, as I said before, it gives the audience some context to justify why action is necessary. It's not part of Coca-Cola's identity to go down and help local drought victims. It may be part of a local charity's identity. So it gives the readership a reason to understand why action might be necessary. So this gives readers a fuller sense of the imperative to reducing packaging. For a failure to do so may threaten the coherence of Spire's identity. This is just a little add-on point. This here, basically, all that it means is it's saying that look, if Spires didn't reduce packaging, if we didn't support Walker's initiative, we would actually be contradicting what Spires is about. We'd be undermining the identity of Spires Primary School, and that's not a good thing. But so for a failure to do so, it may threaten the coherence of Spires' identity, whether or not Spires' identity makes sense. So what Walker, I'm saying, has done here is pretty clever. She's basically, what this paragraph is saying is that she's defined what Spires is about. Spires is about being environmentally friendly. If Spires is about being environmentally friendly, then don't you think we should be trying to pick up rubbish? That's basically what she's saying. It prevents the readers from going, well, who cares? So what if there's rubbish? Alrighty, so that was kind of pretty high level stuff, but hopefully you guys understood what I was getting at there. If not, I will put this essay up afterwards and you can read through it and take it in your own time, because this might be a lot to go through. Alright, another little purpose thing here. Although paragraph 2 and 3 both describe Spires rubbish, they serve different purposes. Now, this is an interpretation. This interpretation is a little bit more, a little harder to see maybe than the first one. I'm talking about these two paragraphs. This purpose is actually a lot harder to see. So this is kind of high level stuff as well. But I've gone out on a limb here. I've tried to say something a little bit different. Because at the end of the day, if you want to stand out in VCAA English, you have to say something different. And the people who stand out generally, as long as their points make reasonable sense, generally do very well. Because just think of your poor examiner reading like 300 essays a day. Everyone says basically the same thing, generally. They talk about statistics. But if you have the opportunity to make a different point, then go for it. Go out on a limb. Say something different. Even if you're not 100% certain that this is precisely what is being suggested or what the effect might be, go out on a limb. They just want to see you have an interpretation, and as long as you can provide some evidence and some reason. So let's see what I did here. Paragraph 2 and 3 both describe Spires rubbish. They nevertheless serve different purposes. Paragraph 2 describes the rubbish in generalist terms, packaging in our everyday lives, while paragraph 3 describes rubbish in specific terms, and localizes it to the schoolyard. Alright, so this is sort of tricky. It zooms in on particular examples of the students' rubbish, the little packets of cheese and biscuits, the boxes of juice, little plastic fish, blah, blah, blah. So what I'm saying here is that this paragraph talks about rubbish just in the general everyday life of people. This is just talking about rubbish in our everyday lives. Whereas this one goes to the schoolyard and it gets kind of nitty gritty. It gets really specific. I saw a sushi roll, soy sauce, and a cute little plastic fish. A cute little plastic fish is like 4 centimeters long. It's getting really nitty gritty about the sort of rubbish. Little tomato sauce containers. blah, blah, blah. So what I'm saying is here is that she describes the rubbish in paragraph 2 in sort of generalist terms. She's being general, and then she's much more specific in the third paragraph. She localizes it to the schoolyard. And here's an example how. All right. So the analysis doesn't stop there. What's the suggestion of this, or what's the effect? Well, the result is, I say, that Walker depicts Spy's waste level from two different angles, generally and specifically. Okay. Therefore, or thereby, both broadening, okay, taking to the general level, and particularizing her attack, her argument, to form a more comprehensive and potentially more disturbing image of the poor state of Spy's environmental health. All right, so she goes to the general level, then she gets really specific. So she broadens and then particularizes, she specifies her attack, or her argument might be a better word there, to form, and what's the result? Well, it's more comprehensive. And by comprehensive, what I mean is, if you look at an issue from two different angles, from the broad angle and from the zoomed in angle, if you zoom out and if you zoom in, then you're being more comprehensive in your analysis. You're looking at things from different angles. And what this means is that the reader gets a fuller picture. And it's kind of more disturbing in a way, isn't it? Because we're given more information, or we see the problem from two different perspectives, a general perspective in our everyday lives and a specific perspective. Okay. What's the effect on the readers? Well, by giving readers a more extensive, actually it's comprehensive perspective of Spy's environmental condition, readers may gain a deeper sense of the problem, which may in turn inspire alarm and motivation to take action. Yeah. So if you see an issue from multiple perspectives, you understand the issue better, don't you? You do, generally. Just think of an example in your own life when you've tried to understand something and looking at it from a zoomed out perspective and a zoomed in can often help. And by getting a deeper sense of the problem, they may therefore be more alarmed by the actual problem because they understand it better. All right, so that was the third paragraph. You can go back and have a look at what I'm kind of saying there. And again, this was just a general sort of interpretation. But I provided some evidence, I provided a reason, and I'm pretty confident that this would score very highly. Okay, now we get into the image. Now, it's always good, as I always say, it's always good to analyze the image in how it interacts with the piece. Pretty basic, but the image will always be kind of riding off some point in the written bit. The image will always be kind of affirming some point or heightening the point of something or strengthening the point a writer has already made. And that's exactly what this image does. What's it affirming? It's affirming the danger of if we don't reduce our rubbish. Or even more simply, it's really just affirming what she says in these two paragraphs, which is that there's rubbish everywhere. There's rubbish in the schoolyard. There's all this rubbish in our everyday lives. There's all this plastic and crap that we're producing. And this is the sort of end result, dark and gloomy. Okay, so notice how I've connected this. It's not hard to connect things all the time. Once you liberate yourself a little and realize, hey, these sort of terms like supplemented and heightened, I can almost just throw them in when I like. I know that doesn't sound good, but really you can. So look what I've done here. This comprehensiveness up here is supplemented with a visualization of the outcome of Spy's overabundance of packaging. Okay, now is this is the point I make here of how Walker gives a really comprehensive analysis of the problem of SPI's environmental health, is that literally supplemented by the visualization of the outcome of SPI's overabundance of packaging, namely this video? Is that what the writer literally intends to do? I don't know. I'm just saying that possibly this is a way of understanding it. It's an interpretation. And what I mean by the outcome of SPI's overabundance of packaging, what do I mean by that? Well, let's read on. Walker depicts a heap of filled up rubbish bags foregrounded by a seemingly endless valley of similar mounds. Okay, I notice something here. I've described the image. That's not the end of the analysis though. Too many students spend the whole time describing the image. If you notice here in this paragraph, which you will soon, that's pretty much it. I don't describe the image anymore after that. Why? Because when you describe something, you don't analyze something. And when you don't analyze something, you don't get any marks for it. The descriptions, the examples you provide like this, you don't get marks for these. This is just evidence that you need to provide to substantiate your analysis. But it's not the analysis itself. So you want to keep your quotes as short as possible. And similar with the image, keep your descriptions of the image as short and sweet as possible. Okay, so why does she depict a heap of filled up rubbish bags? Why include this image? This decision may have been to draw the parents' attention to the ultimate outcome of not reducing their use of packaging. And what's the outcome? A world in which rubbish stretches out to the horizon and beyond. So how I've interpreted this image is not to say, hey, there's just a lot of rubbish. I'm saying that possibly why she's included this image is that it's that it represents the dystopian future if rubbish is not reduced. That this is the end outcome. We are going to live in a world of mountains of rubbish. That's probably that's one of the closest things I can think of as to hell. I mean, this is hell, really. Look in the background of this image. You can see rubbish just extending onto the horizon, an endless sea of black bags. Pretty horrible. And what I'm suggesting is that this is the end outcome if we don't reduce that rubbish. Okay, so that's what Walker was trying to do with this image. So it situates Walker's argument in an implied chain of logic. Okay, follow along here. That is, the more waste produced by SPI's community, the more mounds of rubbish, and the closer the community is to realizing the dystopia inherent in the image. So I've just made another little interpretation, which is just saying what I pretty much just said, which is that the more rubbish we produce, the less we reduce our rubbish, the closer we get to a world like this, where rubbish piles up and piles up and piles up. It's a chain of logic. The logic being that if we don't reduce our rubbish, then we will produce more rubbish and we will therefore move closer to a world of this image. Okay, what's the effect on the readership? That was a suggestion. Now what's the effect? Not only may this prompt fear in the audience, that's a pretty classic response you would think to an image like that, but it may also command a sense of urgency and direct action to remedy their waste producing behavior. Why? Why would they want to? Why would it command a sense of urgency? Why would they do something? Well, they want to avoid. They're motivated to avoid subjecting their children to the possible world inherent in this image, a foreboding and sunless gloom. Yeah. Now, notice, no doubt, if you've written a lot of language analysis articles, you may have written something like this. Command a sense of urgency, a need to perform action. This is a very common effect. Too many students spend time, worrying about persuasive techniques and not enough about how replicable effects are. Most articles play on the same effects in the audience. They play on the audience's fear. And in doing so, if you're scared about something, then generally the writer will use that fear as a way to go, okay, you need to snap out of this and do something. Exactly what Walker's doing. She's going, I want to make you as scared as possible about the world which will arrive to us if we don't reduce our rubbish. I want to freak you out so you'll snap out and do action. And if you've ever taken interest in the climate change debate, that's exactly what climate change proponents do all the time, which is to show, look what's going to happen to our world. The world's heating, the ice caps are melting, all this terrible stuff is going to happen. And it's a way of snapping the public out of their own kind of stupor of not really caring about the environment. So it's a very powerful technique and it's used all the time. So take note of it. All right, so there I've kind of analyzed the image. All right, next point. Now just note, this is kind of a long analysis. I did, how many more paragraphs do we have? 1, 2, 2. I think it's about 1,300 words, and that's too long. You only need to write 800, 900. So just take note, this is an inordinately long analysis. 2 paragraphs left. A lot of you, let me just say quickly, a lot of you might be thinking, well, we haven't seen any analysis of the second piece yet. When's that going to happen, Max? It's going to happen soon. But I've always advocated that the simplest approach to doing comparative analysis is to analyze the main piece. There's usually a main piece, which is longer. Analyze the first piece, then analyze the second piece in response to the first piece. How does the second piece respond to the first piece? Rather than doing them both at the same time, which I think is really difficult. And for the life of me, I don't understand how some people do it. And in fact, I don't think many people do it at all. But this piece is very short, so I think in my analysis, I only give about a paragraph on it, because relative to this piece, it's about a third as long or so. So it doesn't need as much analysis. All right, next paragraph. This is some really interesting analysis. This is high level. The risk Walker treads in focusing on the superabundance of rubbish in the students' lunches is that she offends the students' parents by making them feel attacked and therefore alienated. All right, I'm talking about, actually, you know what, in this analysis, I pretty much did chronological. I pretty much analyzed the first paragraph, then I analyzed the second and third. Now I'm analyzing the fourth. And then I think I analyzed the fifth. No, nothing wrong in doing chronological analysis, as long as you do it well. I generally don't tend to do it, but I just happen to do it here by accident. So this paragraph, why does she say this? Why did she admit that her own school, her canteen, her staff have actually been contributing to the rubbish problem? Remember, her point is that she wants parents to reduce their own rubbish. Generally, think of your own life. When people make an argument, do they generally admit that they are actually part of the problem? Generally not. You hear politicians ever going, hey, the Liberal government's terrible for what they did, but actually we're pretty terrible as well. We also contributed to this problem. No, they never do that. So why did she do it? Because she does do it here. She implies that the canteen has had all this unnecessary packaging, that a staff had this coffee pod machine, that the teachers were using all these pretty tea bags and contributing rubbish. Why did she do that? She does it because it's a way of admitting that some guilt, and by doing so, reducing the possible feeling from her parents that they're being attacked. Yeah, she's just spent the whole article here decrying the amount of rubbish in people's everyday lives and the amount of rubbish that the parents' children are walking around the school with. The danger she's running into very quickly here as the parents would go, Jesus, I feel attacked This woman is just attacking the way I live, the way I raise my children, blah blah blah. And what she does here is she diffuses this. She goes, no, no, I'm not attacking you. I'm not. We're also part of the problem. I know we need to do better as well. It's a way of shouldering some of the responsibility. And a lot of the time, that can be a very persuasive technique when a person shoulders some of the responsibility of the problem because it shows that they're kind of credible, that they're not interested in blaming other people. They're actually interested in solving the problem, and it's kind of humble, it's kind of honest. These are all values we really appreciate in our society. So let's look how I analyze this. The risk Walker treads in focusing on the superabundance of rubbish in the students' lives is that she offends the students' parents by making them feel attacked and therefore kind of alienated. So it's really important you try and understand these sort of relationships. I think this is the trickiest part of language analysis. Okay, when you feel attacked, a lot of the time, when you get attacked by someone, it kind of makes you feel alienated from them. All of a sudden, they've put up a bridge. If you ever have an argument in someone, all of a sudden you're not on the same side as that person anymore. You're alienated from them. So the danger here is that she's potentially alienating her audience, which is not a good thing. She wants the audience, she wants the parents to be on the same side as her. And by attacking them, she's potentially pushing them on the other side of her. All right, so this risk of alienating her audience, which is directly counterproductive to the object of her piece, which is to persuade. This risk is especially apparent in the use of the possessive determiner your in your children, as well as when she boldly questions the parents towards the end of the newsletter on their own packaging habits. Bit of language, meta language here, possessive determiner. It's a little useful thing to remember. It won't make or break your essay. It's completely unnecessary, but it will show to your examiner that you understand language, and it's a little persuasive technique on your own part to just show off to the examiner a bit. So your is a possessive determiner. That's all you need to really remember. Yeah. A lot of students, I know a lot of you guys, your teachers harp on about the importance of meta language. Meta language is not that important at all. It's really not. If I didn't need to say possessive determiner. It's just it's a nice little way of denoting my understanding of language, but it doesn't actually help me analyze the piece at all. I could have just got rid of this. But yeah, it's a good little thing to just flavor your analysis with, but don't worry too much about meta language. The important bit is just analysis. Okay. So I'm basically saying, what I'm saying here is that the your is kind of dangerous here in terms of alienating her audience, because she's affirming that it's their children, that they are part of the problem. Your children, you're contributing to rubbish. And then this question towards the end of the newsletter of their own packaging habitats. How many nights a week? This is over. How many nights a week do you eat takeaway? Like you could read this sentence in a kind of bitchy voice and go, wow, this Walker, she's a bitch. How many nights a week do you eat takeaway? Plastic boxes of beef? How many nights a week are you blah, 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 blah? I mean, you could go, geez, Walker, calm down. Why are you questioning me about my own takeaway habits? So the risk is she's alienating her audience right now. She's running that risk. However, and this is the main point of this paragraph, however, there are several instances throughout the newsletter that suggest Walker is aware of this risk. Okay, interesting. In noting the canteen's tomato sauce containers and the staff's multiplying little pods, Walker retargets the focus of her ire towards the school itself, unburdening the parents of some of the blame. That's the point we get to that I was speaking of before. Unburdening the parents of some of the blame. Turning the focal point onto her school and herself. Similarly, the inclusivity implied in the consistent use of the personal and possessive pronouns of we and our, you can remember that as well, that meta language if you like, not important though, throughout the text, e.g., we are responsible, our everyday lives, we do away with, implies that the waste problem is a shared problem, attributed not only to the parents but to all members of the spy community, including herself. So this bit here, when it just says we, she didn't need to say we, but she said we for a specific reason, which was that to show that it's a shared problem, to include herself in the problem, to imply through this inclusivity that they're all on the same side, that she's not attacking them, that this is a general problem that everyone faces. Okay. What's the effect of this? The analysis doesn't stop here, people. You might be tempted to go, okay, that was interesting. Move on. We haven't looked at the effect on the readership yet. How might this persuade the audience? Okay, well, by owning some of the blame, Walker avoids the charge of hypocrite and evokes a more equitable and perhaps likable impression of herself, which may better endear her argument to parents. Okay, so she avoids the reader potentially going, well, you're actually, the hypocrite isn't quite the right. I don't think this is quite correct. By owning some of the blame, avoids, I'll just say alienating, just keep it simple, hey? All right. There you go. I should have proofread this before I send it out to you guys. Okay. Basically, as I implied earlier, when you own some of the blame, a lot of the time you can actually endear yourself to others. You can actually make yourself look more likable. No one likes someone who just attacks them but never potentially acknowledges their own part in the problem. And that's exactly what Walker does here, and that's exactly why it's a powerful persuasive technique. All right, so that was some high-level analysis there. Now we get on to the next bit. Second article. Now, as I said at the start, when I thought, in my opinion, that this article had kind of two central points, which, well, the main idea is that, of course, the parents should not reduce their use of packaging. And there were two kind of central ideas in support of that, which was that it's unfair to ask us to do that. We're really busy. And also it's unfeasible. We just can't do it. So let's look at how I analyze this. However, as the irritated and somewhat exasperated tone of Lewis's reply suggests, Walker does not totally succeed in avoiding inciting feelings of being attacked in her audience. Interesting. I suggested here that perhaps she got over the danger of alienating her audience, and now I'm looking at it from Louise's point of view and going, well, actually, maybe she didn't. The sarcasm in Lewis's first sentence is a jibe at a possible injustice in Louise's argument, namely, the proposal that more environmental effects must be made despite parents like Louise already doing what we can. All right, so she's really getting to the point that, where's the sentence? Fair go, Denise. We are already doing what we can. And why is this an injustice? Well, if somebody's already doing all they really can to try and stop a problem, it's pretty unfair to then go, hey, you should be doing more. You're not doing enough. Okay. This may have the effect. But what's the effect of this? That was the suggestion. That was my analysis of already doing what we can. That was what I thought it suggested, a possible injustice. What's the effect on the audience? Second step of analysis. What's the effect? This may have the effect of reminding some members of Louise's audience that they too are already making significant efforts, thereby positioning them to view Walker's argument as an unjustified attack. Yeah, so it's kind of a reminder, is what I'm saying. She's reminding parents, A parent might have just read this first article and gone, yeah, you're right. Maybe there is this danger of hurting the environment. And then she reads Louise's and she goes, well, wait a second. I am already doing all this stuff. I walk my kids to school. I use plastic containers. I mean, now this principal's having a go at me because sometimes I give my child that little plastic sushi soy sauce containers with his sushi. I mean, please. Already doing what we can also functions in another way. Okay, what's the other way? Well, which is to expose an assumption that Walker makes in her argument. Namely, that parents are in fact capable of reducing their waste. Walker suggests that this is not so. Okay, the point here is that throughout this whole piece, Walker has had this steady assumption, and you might not have actually acknowledged it because it's a pretty kind of harmless assumption, but maybe not. The assumption is that the parents can actually reduce their rubbish. If she's arguing that the parents must reduce their rubbish, then she's kind of assuming that, well, you actually can. Louise is suggesting, well, actually, maybe we can't. Maybe parents can't. Have you any idea of how much time it takes? We have to go to work. We don't have time to be worrying about environmentally friendly stuff, blah, blah. Okay. Our parents aren't even capable of reducing their waste. Louise suggests that this is not so, criticizes Walker's lack of awareness of the busy life she leads, signaling that Walker overlooks the fact that she and possibly other parents do not have the time to actually apply some of Walker's suggestions, like spreading the cheese on the crackers herself. That was an example given in this bit. This suggests, what's the suggestion of this? Remember, language analysis is a game of suggestions. Analyze one thing and then you ask yourself, okay, what does that suggest? Okay, what does that suggest in turn? And what does that suggest in turn? And that's how you do really sophisticated and deep analysis. Keep asking yourself on the same quotation a lot of the time, what does this suggest? Rather than analyzing 5,000 different quotations, analyze just a few, but go deep on them. Don't go wide, go deep. This suggests that the proposals are unfeasible and shouldn't be heeded to. Okay, yeah, that kind of makes sense. I mean, if they can't follow the proposals, if they don't have time, if they have to go to work, then the proposals aren't feasible. And if the proposals aren't feasible, then why the hell would you follow them? You know, if your parents say, hey, you should go take out the rubbish now, but it's pouring with rain outside, and what it would mean is that if you take out the rubbish, the bag's going to break, rubbish is going to get strewn everywhere, and so it's not feasible, then why the hell would you go take out the rubbish now? On that argument. Okay. Indeed, Louise's strategy in a reply is one primarily of exposing the lack of feasibility. That's her strategy. She wants to go, Walker, you're not feasible. And by the way, that is the strategy that the Liberal government does with the Labor government. And in fact, that's the strategy that the Republican government does to the Democratic government in America. And that's the strategy that all kind of more practical, sort of focused people will do to the more idealistic people. That they'll go, hey, what you're saying isn't going to work. So this is a very common thing. Once you keep awareness of how these persuasive techniques play out in real life all the time. Maybe you have parents like I do. I have a practical father and an idealistic mother. And every single argument they have is an argument of my mum going, wouldn't it be great if we do blah, blah, blah? And my dad going, well, that's just not going to work. Okay, it's just not going to work if we put blah, blah, blah. Okay, so have awareness of that. It will make language analysis a lot easier. Both paragraphs 1 and 2 are intended to show that when applied to real life, Walker's proposals fail to satisfy their intended purpose. Okay, the soy sauce pumps Walker recommends are shown to only create more mess. So what I'm saying here is both of these paragraphs, one of their core purposes is to show that Walker's suggestion and proposal doesn't actually work. It's not going to actually achieve what it set out to do. Remember, in this article, she suggests some way of just getting like a soy sauce pump or something at the canteen. Why not use a common flask from which the sauce could be pumped at the counter? Louise goes, well, wait a second. What a mess this is going to make. You're actually not going to achieve what you're trying to do. We're just going to have soy sauce everywhere. And then Walker also goes, she talks about how she wants to get rid of the coffee pod machine. She wants to influence the staff to replace the coffee pod machine. Again, Luis goes, well, wait a second. If we get rid of the coffee pod machine, it's just going to go to hard rubbish. You're actually going to be creating more rubbish. So you're completely undermining, you're failing to satisfy the intended purpose of your proposal. Soy sauce pumps create more mess. Coffee pod machine is just going to end up in hard rubbish, and therefore it's an ill-founded idea. It's contradictory. It's contradictory because Walker's saying that by replacing the coffee pod machine, she's going to be reducing rubbish. Louise is going, no, you're not. It's going to be joining hard rubbish. You're going to be creating more rubbish. For it too will become rubbish. Okay, interesting. Further, one last point. Vague principle suggests the vague principle is here. It is a great shame if, for a vague principle, our lives have become more difficult and we can't enjoy the benefits of the 21st century. Okay, what does this suggest? What does vague principle here suggest? Well, here's what I've written. Vague principle suggests Walker's argument lacks clarity. It is non-specific. It denotes an absence of careful and deliberative thought on Walker's argument. All right. Vague. What does something mean if it's vague? Well, it means often that it's not clear. It's not specific. Doesn't take into account details, something like that. And what does this in turn suggest? Well, it in turn suggests a lack of careful and deliberative thought. So do you see how I've gone from one suggestion to the next? So vague principles suggest a lack of clarity, non-specific. And then I've gone, this in turn, I could have just replaced this with denoting an absence of, this in turn suggests a lack, this is just really spelling out what I'm doing, a lack of careful and deliberative thought. Why? Because if it's vague, if it's not clear, if it's not specific, then doesn't that just kind of suggest that she hasn't really thought it through? It's vague. She hasn't pinned down exactly what she's talking about. So it suggests a lack of careful and deliberative thought. Okay, interesting. What's the effect though? The analysis doesn't stop there. What's the specific effect you think, in your words, of vague principle and these suggestions on the audience? What does this suggest? What's the potential effect? Okay, for those time-stressed parents who value practical thinking, like my dad, and already feel they are making an effort to preserve the environment, Louise's strategy of realism may be compelling. Notice what I've done here. Well, actually, first, let's just zoom out for a second. Let me just summarize what generally has been done here, which is that strategy of realism. What I mean by this is just focusing on the reality of this proposal and basically saying, well, for readers who kind of are practical, they may feel that Walker's kind of living in airy fairyland, that it's totally impractical what she's saying. And so Louise's strategy of highlighting this practicality, the reality of it, may kind of be persuasive. But notice specifically what I've done here, which is I've honed in on the precise potential members of the audience who might be persuaded by this technique. Time-stressed parents who value practical thinking. This is a really important strategy with analysis that for some reason isn't taught in schools. And the strategy is that you need to identify the actual members of the audience who will be persuaded by this. Will all people be persuaded by Louise's strategy of realism here? Will all people be persuaded by concerns of whether or not these proposals actually work. Not necessarily. Let's return back to the climate change debate because that's hot in our society in this day and age. You kind of have two sides to the debate. You have to decide going, we need to reduce our climate emissions now because the world is going to get hurt. And then you got the other side of the debate, like the Liberal government, who basically goes, well, it's going to cost the economy heaps of money to do this. Our whole economy depends on selling iron ore and coal. We're going to lose heaps of jobs. It's going to be an economic disaster. They're focusing on, arguably, you might say, the reality of what reducing climate emissions might mean. And you might say, in contrast, climate change proponents are focusing on are a little bit more, perhaps more idealistic. They're not focusing on the present costs of reducing emissions in terms of the economy. But you might also say in the long term, they're actually focusing on the long-term environmental costs and what will mean for us tomorrow. But in any case, you can see the divide there perhaps between a little bit of idealism and practicality. Now, for idealistic people, this might not necessarily persuade them. But for time-stressed parents, and also for parents who have got heaps of time, then everything that Louise just said isn't going to be persuasive. She goes here, both of us parents go to work. Well, if you're a parent who works at home, you might go, okay, yes, so what? You go to work, I don't. So let's just reduce the amount of rubbish we use. So specify the members of the audience who you think may be persuaded. Don't just go, the audience may therefore be persuaded, because it's not true. Only some of the members of the audience might be persuaded. All right. And conclusion. Conclusion, very simple. We've gone over it in class, so go over your notes, but I'll just briefly recap. Pick out just kind of the main one or two ways you think each writer made that point and just identify that. So, thus, while Walker attempts to remind parents of their commitment to the environment and the destructive repercussions of an over-reliance on packaging, Louise exposes and lambasts the unrealism of Walker's specific proposals, attempting to evoke both ridicule and outrage in her audience towards the suggestion that she and parents like her are not doing enough to protect the environment. So it's very simple, the conclusion, remember? Generally, you can just do it with a sort of therefore, and then you go, while writer X does A and B, while writer X ridicules and lambasts Walker, writer B Y does C and D. One sentence is all you need. And that's your conclusion. All right, guys. If you have questions, we can talk about it in tutoring. That was a lot, I know. It's a little bit of an unusual way. I don't usually focus on things like purpose, but hopefully it gave you something to sort of think about. If it totally lost you, then yeah, fair enough. This was something different. I get that. And check out some. I'm going to make some more videos just focusing on more kind of just hardcore, normal sort of analysis. But if you can start thinking about, well, okay, what does this paragraph? Why does she include this paragraph here? This opening paragraph. It's always good to focus on opening paragraphs. The writer had a billion different ways she could have started this piece. Why did she start the piece in this way? Well, maybe she started the piece in this way to establish a commitment, to establish the values of Spires, that they're a school that cares about the environment, and therefore to sort of trap her audience into accepting that reducing packaging was necessary for the Spire community. All right, so that's something to think about, and I'll see you guys all soon.